So last time we looked at Resident Evil, we looked at the original classic run of the games from Resident Evil 1 to Resident Evil Code Veronica. I'm not gonna lie to you fellas, that video was extremely complicated to write. Not only because almost none of those games are still relevant, but because that lineup of games started out as an ugly duckling a bit, but started to really get good around the time of Resident Evil 2 and 3, and then Code Veronica came in and did a lot of damage and started to really decline things. This video should be a lot easier to make. Unlike the PS1 trilogy, both of the games we talk about today are still relevant in Resident Evil's lore and timeline of events. We're going to look at Resident Evil 1's remake and Resident Evil 0. Both of which, for some bizarre reason, used to be GameCube exclusives that never saw the light of day on other consoles until they were remastered around 2014, if I'm remembering right. I was still fresh out of high school when the PlayStation 4 was launching, and these were a cross-gen release, but I was too busy bumping Resident Evil 6's Mercenaries mode online to really give a shit. These are the earliest RE games still sold on every single platform today, unlike Code Veronica that has no PC release for sale. By extension, that obviously means that these would be the place to start if you feel like you can deal with the tank controls, the fixed camera angles, and a lot of the other old school jank and issues. This is actually an interesting duology because looking at it, you get a rise and fall of an era in one neat package. Resident Evil 1 shows you how good this style of game can be, if we take everything Capcom learned from making the originals into account. A lot of mistakes and missteps the original version made are fixed and corrected here. It will show you why this era is still charming and beloved by a lot of people. Resident Evil 0, on the other hand, will show you everything wrong with this kind of game. Why not everyone was or is in love with this style of Resident Evil. And how sick of it a lot of people were by this point. Even the people making these games had had enough of this shit. That's why I say rise and fall. Resident Evil 1 is everything that works about classic Resident Evil, and Resident Evil 0 is everything that fucking killed it. So we're gonna look at these games start to finish. The remastered re-releases specifically, as they not only are the definitive releases, but are how most people will play these games in this day and age. And they do everything they can do to try to alleviate a little of the clunky control schemes of the originals. In these ports, you can switch between a classic control scheme and a more modern control scheme. Classic gives you the tank controls, and modern gives you fully 3D movement. Now, just about every channel that's head over heels for these old Resident Evil games will try to tell you that the modern controls are terrible and they aren't good, blah 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 blah. But really, they're full of shit, and they're just trying to con you into playing these games their way that they approve of. Plenty of Let's Plays I've watched where people don't even know the difference and just have everything switched to modern by default with almost zero issues are evidence of that. Their main complaint is that the camera switches can be disorienting, since when the camera switches, your directional inputs will switch with them. This can lead to you running into things like walls and enemies during camera cuts if you aren't quick to respond in dire situations. My counter argument to that is that fucking situation isn't any different from how unresponsive the tank controls are in the same sort of scenarios. The time it takes to adjust to a camera switch is dependent on whatever sort of reaction from your inputs that you're expecting out of the game. If your brain is wired to expect one thing or the other when you're trying to move, then whatever the other is, of course it's going to give you trouble. This is just a skill issue depending on whatever you gravitate towards. Also, you gotta love how they'll admit the tank controls are a bit fucking wonky, but you can get used to that. Now, being able to move whatever direction you flick on the stick during a fixed camera angle camera cut, that's impossible to adjust to, right? Like, this is such a stupid fucking debate we even need to have here. Let me tell you something these fucking fossils who shit on the modern controls in their videos and all their little minions who regurgitate that garbage to get senpai to notice them aren't telling you. This idea of whether you want tank controls or fully 3D movement isn't a new thing. As early as Silent Hill 2, you could pick between these two. By the time of Silent Hill 4, even devs making these games kinda were sick of tank controls, and they were going in favor of 3D movement in most of these games by like mid-2000s. It's not like Capcom magically got this idea out of nowhere. They simply gave you an option Silent Hill has gave you since 2001. You wanna know how extra stupid this debate is? You know you get the tank controls even if you pick modern movement, right? They're on the D-pad. You can still play with them and try them out. Considering the type of person meat gobbling the tank controls likely played these games back on PS1 when the DualShock with analog sticks wasn't even out yet, using the D-pad when they want the tank controls shouldn't be a problem. All of this to say, you are allowed to pick. Try each and use whatever the fuck you feel comfortable with. Don't let these fucking fossils pressure you into making your experience with these games more miserable. Pick whatever you want and enjoy yourself. If you prefer the tank controls, use them. If you prefer basic 3D movement, use it. And if anybody doesn't like it, fuck them. You spent the money on this game, you can play it however the fuck you want. All this debating is really the result of the camera angles and not really the control scheme when you really boil down to it anyway. The camera switches are the real reason people are so divisive on one or the other. Evidence? Resident Evil 4 OG also uses tank controls. And while yeah, some people find the controls a bit stiff there today, it is nowhere near the deal breaker that it is for these older titles. Because of the perspective, absolutely still playable and still enjoyable today. Damn near a modern shooter with even now with some slight blemishes on it, regardless of the lack of strafing like RE5 and up have. Even more so now that the controls are swapped by default to standard shooting controls on console. Something that modern controls for these remasters also allow you to do. Left trigger to aim, right trigger to shoot. These aren't the only games to switch to standard shooter controls in their layout either. You also get a dedicated reload button. I can't believe these old games didn't have one their entire run through, it's crazy. I forgot to mention that in the last video, but yes. To reload you needed to pause, go into the status screen, and combine the ammo with the gun over and over and over again. Now, you can still do that here, and I do recommend it a lot of times if something fast is in your face and your ammo is getting low. But again, now it is your choice. It has its advantages to go to the status screen and check your reserve ammo count there. Hell, you still had to do it in Resident Evil 4 with the dedicated reload button and ammo clip counter at the bottom of the screen, only telling you what is in the magazine. But now the player is in control of how much they need the information versus just staying in the world and staying in the zone. Sometimes I already know I have enough ammo and I just want to get the damn reload in and get back to it. I'd rather stay in the world, in the zone, and worry about the ammo count after I kill whatever I'm shooting. Because a lot of times, since I've spent the ammo, I'm now in a situation where I have to kill it anyway. Think about it. Enemies you've damaged refill their health if you don't kill them before you exit a room. So you will never really find yourself in a situation where you put half a clip into something and then decide not to kill it because you should save the ammo. Unless you don't know that they're healed if you leave. At this point, should you decide to disengage, you're just wasting your ammo anyway. Also, controversial take here, but pausing the game like this to reload or swap weapons anytime something gets close to you has always felt kinda scummy in my opinion. Feels like it was an oversight they didn't really think about when they made the original, which kinda rendered all the reload animations they designed useless. You don't have to worry about any sort of bad positioning or pressure from something closing the distance as you reload in those games. And clearly a lot of game devs see it this way too. Resident Evil 4 forces you to reload in real time. You can only swap weapons in the status screen. By the time of Resident Evil 5, the inventory screen doesn't pause the game at all, and it won't for a very long time in this series afterwards. It also doesn't in other horror games either. And also, just to hammer it home, I like the pressure of staying in the world and worrying about when to reload. Imagine playing Alan Wake 2, but anytime something gets close to you, you can just pause the inventory screen, and how many shots you spin or the need to swap a weapon doesn't even matter. Sounds pretty fucking lame. Now, that part of the equation is just a preference thing. That's how these old games were designed. If you play the inventory away, it's not like you're playing wrong or cheating or something, but should you choose to make it more tense on yourself like a modern horror game would be, you absolutely get to do that dynamically and freely with the modern button mapping, and still have all the freedom in the world to do everything through the status menu as well. With these controls, you get something pretty comfortable and easy to adjust to. And that's the brilliance of these remasters and why they can still punch their weight today compared to the first 4 games we talked about in the last video. Simple and easy customization tweaks that make it a little less jarring of a transition to backpedal from 3 console generations of this back in time to this. And the best part? You can mix and match. You still want to rock with a classic button layout, but rock with the modern movement? You can do that. You want to rock with the modern button layout, but the classic tank controls? You can do that too. I didn't even realize you could do that until about partway through this playthrough of these again. Before that, I was rocking the modern layout in full, but I switched to a hybrid of modern controls and tank movement to try it out, and it was really nice. Since I was already fresh off of playing the original 4 games in my last video, and this is kind of my preferred method for playing these games from now on. Now, from here on out, we're going to do these videos the way I always do them, so that means taking you through both games from start to finish, starting with Resident Evil 1 Remake, which I 100% recommend starting with. Spoilers all over the place, vulgar language, yada yada yada. I've made enough of these videos to where you should know what the deal is when you click on one of these. I just freestyle through the game, talking about the good and the bad. In Resident Evil 1's case, my summary is going to be a lot more brief than the Resident Evil 0 one because I literally just covered this game in the last video. This is a remake after all. I'll mostly talk about changes and improvements that I deem worth mentioning, as well as using it to discuss things that are still a problem by nature of it still being an old school Resident Evil game. You know, that sort of thing. Before we start, one more thing. Let's quickly touch on the issue of difficulty. See, I'm sure you know this, but if you don't, Capcom on your first playthrough kind of misleads you on what difficulty you're playing. They don't give you a straight answer on what hard, normal, and easy are here. The option you would think is hard is actually normal. The option you would think is normal is easy. And the option you think is easy is very easy. You don't get a standard, normal, hard, or easy difficulty select until you beat the game once. This isn't the first time they've worried about their games being too hard on people. Resident Evil 3 called its normal mode hard as well. Like I said in my last video, I understand why they do it. I just think the way they tried to fix this issue is wrong. And this is probably their most egregious attempt. To recap what I said on that, Resident Evil 1, 2, and Code Veronica all have pretty terrible off-putting openings balance-wise that kill a lot of new player interest. These classic Resident Evil games typically have a very low completion rate on something like Steam when you look at the achievements. Just because someone buys a game, that does not mean they're going to complete a game. For example, the original 2's problem is the A scenario run to the police station is just too hard on you. If you've played this game a bajillion times, you can probably coast by this easy peasy. But for a new player, it is pretty frustrating. Putting a sea of zombies down one direction and a liquor down the other right after getting to the police station, which in itself can be pretty brutal. Code Veronica's is terrible because it takes almost an hour before you get to a fucking item box, and even longer to get the grenade launcher. Almost 1/3 of Claire's campaign, so you're taking pot shots with her pistol for a long ass time. 1's opening puts people off for a similar reason to Code Veronica. The sheer amount of stuff you can pick up before you can find an item box, and that problem still remains here in the remake. Actually, much worse so. The amount of shit you can pick up can lead to you just being stuck because you don't have any space for a key item you need, let alone figuring out that it is the key item you need. In the original, you could just kind of fumble around a bit until you found a room with the item box. I don't recall that door being locked. Here in this remake, you need a key item to progress to even get there, and it's a really weird, obscure one. You would think, especially if you're a new player, that you need to do something in the room that has a clearly visible key. But that's a death trap and misleading. You can't do anything with this room right now. There's a door behind the main hall that barely even fucking looks like a door because of the pre-rendered backgrounds. Like, if you're coming up the stairs, it just looks like a painting. And even when you see it up close, it's hard to make out that there's a door there. So I'd bet a lot of people who try this game for the first time to get into Resident Evil get stumped right around here, run around in circles confused and just lose patience and skip to 4 or the remake of 2 or something, and that's a shame. I think it could be a little more clear there's a door here, and not only that, but just put a fucking item box where you put the typewriter, dude. As it stands, this opening is a bit worse than the original as far as guiding the player to the first item box, and I believe getting the player to their first item box in save room is crucial when it comes to their enjoyment of a more traditional Resident Evil game. The faster you get them there, the easier it is for them to start figuring things out and putting things up they don't need and coming up with a game plan, getting adjusted to the game. That's what was too hard about these games. Not the difficulty, but the direction. And I think Capcom's misunderstanding of what was turning people away from this is why they fumbled with the difficulty settings when they didn't need to. But that's just about the only part of this game that is worse than the original. And once you figure out there's a door behind here, just about everything else in this game blows almost every other game that has come before out of the water. The game still starts the same way. You pick either Jill or Chris, members of STAR's Alpha team sent in to find Bravo, the team who went missing, investigating murders in the mountains. This intro is so impressive. It keeps the idea and visuals of the original live action intro intact, minus the goofiness. And I think this is also the introduction for how these characters will look for almost a decade or so in the MT framework engine. Because my introduction to Chris was in Resident Evil 5, it's also funny to see pre-roids Chris here with the same face model and everything and like a ninth of the fucking muscle mass. You'll also notice the voice acting here is no longer awful. Much more grounded and serious. Well, about as serious as Resident Evil games can be. It also starts you with your weapon in your hand, so you don't have to fumble around trying to figure out how to defend yourself when you come up on this first zombie. Everything plays out as expected. Chris finds Wesker and Jill missing after investigating a noise, or Jill and Barry find Wesker and Chris missing, and you're off on your Resident Evil journey from here. And can I just say how fucking gorgeous this game is, lighting and art direction wise? Improved item models, lighting, decorations, there are mirrors in certain halls, and it's not just for show either. Yeah, the fixed camera angles still fucking suck, that's still a problem, but there's walls with mirrors in them that reflect whatever you can't see down them, or like puddles and, reflective water. Be that key items, enemies, or ammo, just about everything can be reflected in these. This is also the first appearance of the Samurai Edge that's become iconic to the STARS team. The only thing I have to point out is how muddy and low resolution the textures and art actually is. This is another reason why you likely won't see this door to outside for quite some time. Resident Evil 0 doesn't have this problem, just Resident Evil 1, so I think this is a result of them using shit that was just far too resolution when they originally made this game. Now, to my understanding, there is a mod that makes an attempt to try to correct how low res a lot of this shit is, but that's irrelevant to how most people will be playing these games, so it's worthless in this discussion. But, even being low res, what we're looking at is fine work. Everything in this game is a lot darker and creates a much better atmosphere and mood than anything in the original lineup. There's improved lights, shadows, lightning crackling outside to set the mood. This game may be a little muddy, but it still looks good. Improvements don't stop there. A new addition to this game is defensive items. Sort of an answer to Resident Evil 3's dodge system as a tool to use so you're not just standing around like a fucking idiot while things grab you. Daggers, flash grenades, even tasers for Jill, because of course the woman gets the taser. I recommend going into the status screen and setting this from auto to manual as soon as you can. Chris's flash grenades are especially lethal because shooting them after jamming one in a zombie's mouth will kill it and deal heavy damage to whatever is near it as well, including you, so back your ass up. Now, my first time through this game years ago when I made my Let's Play, I never really found myself using these much. That might be because I got conned by the difficulty. But this time playing on normal, yeah, these are extremely useful. Even mashing the buttons to get out of grabs, they do more damage in this game than they've ever done until now. About what they'll do in the remakes of 2 and 3 to balance out having these defensive tools. So instead of the question being, do you want to spend ammo to get past something or a healing item, the defensive items present a third choice. they're not too scarce to where you won't want to use them either. Especially the knives, which don't do much damage, just get things off of you, so you can have a little fun. You can't use a defensive item if you get grabbed from behind though, so you still need to be careful. All of this you will likely need anyway because of the main addition everyone remembers this game for, completely exclusive to this game, Crimson Heads. As you kill zombies, you'll notice that sometimes their heads pop. Outside of just being a general improvement that's cool and satisfying, it also greatly benefits you because it means they won't come back as Crimson Heads later, which are stronger, faster, and harder to stagger. Your only two ways to prevent this is with a critical head pop, which happens at random with the pistol, but also makes the old trick of using a shotgun upshot headshot more useful than ever, or by using a fuel canteen to burn the bodies. There's tanks of gas scattered all throughout the mansion that have a limited supply to refill the canteen with. This creates a balance using a pistol, hoping for a headshot to save shotgun ammo, using the shotgun to save pistol ammo, if you can spare some shells, and using the fuel canteen so you're not pissing away any of your resources later. And that's probably the funnest part of this game. Like, in my first opening hours, I couldn't believe it, but I was genuinely tense. And that doesn't happen very often for me in Resident Evil games. I don't play them because they're quote-unquote scary. I play them because I enjoy them. I really like the lore, I like the characters, and they're just fun to play. Alright? It's very hard for horror to get something out of me in regards to fear anymore. Like I said, these games are defined by their replayability, and this loop makes this game so fun to play if you're down for a classic Resident Evil game. Now, admittedly, I don't replay this one as much because still, it is a classic Resident Evil game. That means all the parts that were tedious or annoying about playing through these kind of games before still are exactly that. The fixed camera angles, the movement, the ink ripping system to save that I still fucking hate, the constant running back and forth to and from the item box that I just get tired of doing by the midpoint in the game. And that's actually even worse this time around because now that you have to run and grab this damn fuel canteen to go and burn a body anytime you fucking kill anything in this game, you will be doing it twice as much as you ever were in the original. And do not get me started on the fact that Chris still only has 6 fucking inventory slots, and how unbearably tedious that still is to deal with. Or about now having to burn bodies means that Jill needs to be carrying around the lighter and the damn canteen anytime she wants to burn one. You know, it still has that old school running back and forth requirement that starts to bore you and make you want to go play something else instead. But when you're in the mood and you're down for it, this is definitely some of the most fun with one of these classic Resident Evil games you are ever going to have. Now, the plot mostly follows the same events we get out of whoever we pick. Chris will still meet Rebecca as our sidekick for the game. For Jill, Barry still babies her through everything. What's new are new side rooms that loop around now, providing you with ways to get around if one way may be a little too dangerous to go back through. This one hallway with the mirrors is extremely useful, for example. You still need to run away from Jan to get the key item, with the twist being if you grab the serum for Richard here, he can live for a little while longer. And you get a special shotgun later when he dies a second time, which I know of as the Riot shotgun from Resident Evil 4, but I guess technically it debuted in this game first. Funny how it's an asset flip of another game shotgun in the original and also an asset flip of another game shotgun in the remake. But it's a pretty nice shotgun. Either way, the mansion is still mostly the same. So when you get out of the mansion, at the halfway point things start to change. Instead of heading directly to the greenhouse this time around, you take a little detour to the cabins. I do have to say, again, thanks to the fixed fucking camera angles here, and their tendency to keep important information out of your view in a scene, it's pretty easy to fuck around and miss the Magnum right here. It's nice to have it earlier than you would in the original. You didn't get it until your trip back to the mansion, but missing it because you didn't even see the path over here thanks to muddy backgrounds and the fucking restrictive camera angles is a real possibility, and happened to me in my first ever playthrough. Till I was at the point I would usually grab it in the original only to be confused and go back and look up what the fuck is going on. Then I was just pissed and annoyed. As for the cabins, we're here to meet this game's new story edition, the Trevor family. Specifically, Lisa Trevor. She's the daughter of one of Umbrella's staff, if I remember right. Umbrella is constantly treating their staff like shit, man. It's crazy. Similar to the Steve situation, her dad worked for Umbrella and her mother and her were just collateral damage. The father, I'm pretty sure, is in a coffin we needed all these damn masks to open, and the mother is in a coffin later in the game. She's infected with some wild shit and has been ever since she was a child, whatever this monster is. Umbrella tried to fake someone else being her mother once she died, and so that sent her off the deep end, and she goes around killing and collecting faces to find her mom's real face. For now, instead of killing us, she just bonks us over the head because we have plot armor and we're free to continue business as usual when it comes to Plant 42 and dealing with it. The shark room is new and improved, and this is where Richard will die if you saved him earlier. If you saved Richard, as Chris, you get absolutely no help with the Plant 42 boss. Rebecca will only weaken the roots apparently if you didn't manage to get Richard the serum. I think this is 100% fucking bullshit and a shit decision. Especially because, as Jill, if you use V-Jolt, then you don't even have to fucking fight it at all. Barry barges in with a flamethrower and kills it for you. What the fuck? If anyone tells me that women get treated bad in these games, I'm gonna break the fucking neck. They did my boy Chris Redfield dirty here. Either way, back to what we expect. You run into Wesker, head back to the mansion to look around some more, and the hunters get introduced. They're still fast as shit and annoying, but they have been nerfed a bit and are actually designed like someone who made them had some goddamn sense this time around. You no longer have to wait for them to fully get up before you can shoot them again. Their lunge attacks is where they jump in the air and not completely fucking invulnerable to damage on startup, and their instant kill attack is no longer fast as shit with a seeable wind up now. They take less damage and no hit stun if you try to shoot them while they're getting up, but I can live with that. I think that's fair. And all these improvements mean that this section of the game is no longer trash. I actually had a lot of fun with this part of the game, whereas in the original I found it to be complete cow shit. I like that the Yon fight has been moved to the library with a better area and strategy to fight it in. The only thing that irks me here is the part where you need to get to Rebecca to save her from a hunter. Resident Evil 0 is a thing. This bitch killed a million of these things in a game set just before this and even killed her own tyrant. I know that game was made after this one, but that still makes this moment so silly. This is why I'm not a fan of using prequels as crutches to make a new game. Devs and fans both in a lot of series tend to just mindlessly lean on making a prequel as an excuse to make another game with characters they like. And this is the kind of shit that can happen when you need to make a story using characters you've already used elsewhere. Besides that, the only blemish here is this dumbass wall crushing puzzle. You get stuck on the other side, you're dead, and it's extremely easy to accidentally do this while trying to figure out what to even do. So if you haven't saved, you can end up needing to redo a shitload of progress off of one easy mistake to make. Characters in these games are too stupid to understand how to pull things, and you guys already know I don't even like puzzles, so this one pissed me off especially bad. Whatever your defense for this is, you're fucking wrong and it's fucking stupid, end of discussion, moving on. I can't believe I'm saying this, but they completely unfucked the mines. It's actually a good location and one of the highlights of the game. They fixed the biggest issue that made this section complete garbage originally by putting an item box right by the typewriter. This edition alone completely fixes this location, but they do even better than that. Enrico still gets capped by Wesker, and you still need to fight the spider boss, but you actually don't need to pick up the knife to unweb the door. Though, since somebody with fucking sense made this section this time around, it's not annoying to pick it up anyway. But this section no longer takes you directly to the lab this time around. Instead, it takes you underground even further to complete a couple puzzles while Lisa Trevor patrols the area. She's completely immune to gunfire, but doesn't really bother you so long as you don't walk directly in her face since she's slow. So I don't find her irritating like I usually would. She's here mostly because this is her lair and hideout and loops back around to the cabin she bonked you over the head at earlier. Coming back to the mansion again, there's a gate under the main hall, and with everything done and all your key items ready, this is where you actually need to go to finish the game, bringing everything full circle. I really like this change. Here, you'll run into either Wesker or Barry fighting Lisa. Jill gets a choice to give Barry back his gun after he left her for dead back in the mines. The gimmick of this fight is to push all of her mother's coffin weights off the platform. Pretty simple and easy, and you don't really need to fire a single bullet here. With that, she jumps off the platform with her mother's head, and we won't hear from her again until Umbrella Chronicles. Wesker just disappears after this with no explanation, whereas Barry will tell Jill to go on ahead without him. After that, the laboratory plays off almost identical to the original. Because again, someone on Capcom's dev team's brain kicked into activating correctly, there's now a typewriter by the item box when you first walk in so that you can save before the final boss. You still need the MO disc to save Chris or Jill if you didn't play as them, and Wesker is still the traitor. As Chris, he still gets murked by the tyrant after he shows it to you. As Jill, there's one change, and that is instead of knocking Wesker out, Barry will shoot him to keep it consistent with him dying and being reborn by the virus in the lore. That and the tyrant still attacks him, which in combination I assume kills him from blunt force trauma and blood loss. This also takes place in the room with the tyrant this time around, so Wesker can still show you the tyrant and still release it. Everything is the same after that. They set off the self-destruct on the facility, we grab the other character out of lockup, and haul ass out of there. Tyrant is still the final boss, but your companion will help you in the battle if they're still alive. They all escape on the chopper and all is well for a while. Resident Evil 1 Remake is still absolutely phenomenal if you're on board with the problems that come with these older Resident Evil games, and is without a doubt probably not only the best of the classic Resident Evil games, but one of the best remakes ever made. Unlike the remakes of 2 and 3, even though I consider both of those to be way better than this by miles, just because of the nature of being more modern and the improvements that come with that, there's a case to be made for how pure and true to the original this particular remake tries to be. And that's a double-edged sword. It is absolutely respectable and admirable just how true to the one that came before this is, and how this can still work if you're willing to accept and keep an open mind and adjust to the type of game this is. A lot of indie games you see that come out and mimic this old school feel are directly inspired by this remake, specifically these modern remasters. This is a good game if you can deal with the flaws that come with its nature. But the other edge of the sword is that being so true to the original, it was a good idea at the time because Resident Evil 4 hadn't happened yet, and revolutionized the gaming industry. This remake was in the right place at the right time to be made like this. But there are a lot of people that think this game deserves another remake, to be more like the ones of 2 and 3, and for a good reason. There is no denying that the gaming landscape has moved on past this. Horror games have moved past this. And having to go back to this is a turnoff for a lot of people, and they're either not willing to try it or try it and don't like it. And they have every reason to feel that way. Fixed camera Resident Evil survived one console generation and half of another. Over the shoulder Resident Evil has been around since half of one console generation and 3 full ones. Resident Evil 1 is a good game, yes. It's actually a great game, but being true to the original comes with a lot of the original gameplay loop tedium and restrictions. And because of that, there isn't a day on any alternate universe where this is going to match the appeal or sales of the Resident Evil 2 Remake or 3 Remake. You don't have to like it. You can be one of those weird outliers that swears up and down they're worse than the originals. Blah blah blah, yada yada yada. Your opinion on the games themselves are absolutely worthless when it comes to what is going to be more accessible and appealing. Sorry, telling you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. A lot of people can, and will, skip straight to 2 or 3 because by Resident Evil's nature and of its biggest strength, you do not need to have played the previous games to enjoy and understand whatever one you choose to start with, because none of them are really direct sequels with the exception to this rule being Resident Evil 7 and 8. Now, the same problem I mentioned of this separate character stories thing just being a jumbled in, blended together mess to create the lore of the events that took place here still applies, but that's just another way it also stays faithful. So, if you like this kind of game, Resident Evil 1 Remake is the best it gets for this era. The only one that comes close to it in my opinion is Resident Evil 3 OG. If you don't like this kind of game, Resident Evil 1 can either be so good that it can sway you in a way that the originals couldn't, or it's still so stuck in the era that it comes from that it won't. But it is without a doubt the best example of what's appealing about this style of game. Unfortunately, Resident Evil 0 happened directly after this game and put classic Resident Evil in a fucking coffin for good. If Code Veronica was the game that gave classic Resident Evil a terminal illness, Resident Evil 1 Remake would be in the hospital and starting to make a good recovery, and Resident Evil 0 would be the era finally succumbing and flatlining. This game has issues. It is the most tedious and frustrating one you will ever slog through. It starts with Bravo team landing in the Acclaim Mountains during their investigation of the murders going on there after engine trouble, where they find a prisoner transport that was moving someone by the name of Billy Cohen, who they begin to suspect, since he seems to be a serial killer, is the one behind the disappearances going on here. Resident Evil best girl, Rebecca, finds a stopped train and starts searching it only to get ambushed by zombies. The entire crew and all passengers have been infected by killer leeches that have turned them. Along the way, running into Billy face to face, who tells her to fuck off and leave him alone and runs off for now. Edward, another one of the team members, crashes through the window of the train and tells her to stay inside. It's too dangerous outside before he dies from his wounds. And Rebecca searches around some more, running into Billy again, who's changed his mind and wants to work together to survive. She's reluctant at first, but after Billy saves her from some leeches, she comes around. With that, we have control of both characters and the game is now officially in motion. I want to say straight up that Resident Evil 0 does not start off bad. It actually starts off really good. You'll load it up, play the first couple of hours or so, and you'll be like, what's the big deal? This is nowhere close to that bad. And it has one of the coolest ideas for a Resident Evil game. Sort of a predecessor to the co-op and companion characters of later games, and a successor to the idea of multiple protagonists, Resident Evil 0 has you control both characters. Something that could have really helped unfuck Resident Evil 1's story. Like Code Veronica before it, this means there's no goofy shenanigans here as far as canon, and no mess for them to try to clean up later. Everything that happens in this game happens, period, in the lore. And you don't need to run through the game multiple times doing the same shit over and over just to get the full story. Both characters have strengths. Billy is a tank that can take a beating, and Rebecca can mix chemicals. In theory, this creates a choice. In reality, what this means is most of the time, unless you're just a Rebecca fan or some shit, you will mostly want Billy on point, with Rebecca on backup. And this setup is a lot of fun. If you've played Resident Evil 5 or 6 before, it feels so cool getting that feeling those games give you of you and your partner covering each other while you engage targets in a classic style of Resident Evil game. And this is the biggest strength this game has. At certain points you will need to split up the characters to solve puzzles or progress forward, and while there are definitely more optimal decisions on who to go where, nothing is so fucked up where if you didn't send a specific character it's an unplayable mess. Unless you set that character up without a power weapon or something, but that's an issue with classic Resident Evil as a whole, expecting you to be fucking psychic and know what's coming next, so it's not really an issue specific to this game, and I can't hold it against it. More of just an old school issue that gets on a lot of people's fucking nerves. But yeah, this system is pretty appealing. Anytime, regardless of wherever the other character is in the game, if they've split up, with the touch of a button, you can swap to the other character. Almost completely seamlessly. It was impressive tech for the GameCube, and even today it's impressive because not even GTA 5 can do this without loading. I also forgot to mention this when talking about the Resident Evil 1 remake, but those ammo issues that the original games had, where the devs would hide crucial drops in unseeable, undetectable parts of the world, is almost completely fixed and done away with. You'll still find a hidden box in a drawer or on a body or something, but I think that's fair. What you won't have to deal with is the ammo being hidden in some random corner of the room, unseeable in the backgrounds where you just randomly mash on that action button until you pick something up. Speaking of ammo, whenever the characters get separated, usually there's a little drop box to pass supplies and key items between the two. As you'll probably predict, something you find as one character will likely need to be used somewhere the other character is. And I gotta say, while Resident Evil 1's remaster was no slouch when it came to looking good, this game blows it out of the water graphically. Same sort of improved lighting and shadows, but the backgrounds are cleaned up a lot more here and are extremely less muddy. I don't know what the issue was there in comparison to this. Maybe something related to the aspect ratio? But since only a purest fucking caveman pushing over 40 would ever be playing this in 4:3 instead of 16:9, they definitely could have done a bit more work to clean that game's backgrounds up. I think this remaster was released after that one, so maybe they learned some things and upgraded their tech. Also, why do the worst Resident Evil games, being Code Veronica and this one, have the best save themes? Crazy but true, this shit is a banger too. For a while, this game feels pretty fucking good, and in the early game, it's feeling like a contender for one of the best classic Resident Evil games, and I mean that genuinely. Now, there's one major issue here you've probably noticed at this point if you're playing it, but I want to save that for the point where things start to go downhill in the game in general later. But for now, I'm having a great time. It's just some good ass old school Resident Evil with the twist of having some backup. The train starts driving itself, and Billy and Rebecca get a glimpse of some twink outside singing and controlling the leeches while they try to find a way to stop the train. We pick up our first shotgun, of which there are 2 in the game, with strengths and weaknesses, fight our first boss, and would you look at that, Wesker and Birkin from Resident Evil 1 and 2 respectively turn out to be old pals and are having a conversation. They're confused as shit as to what's going on since this T-virus leak wasn't planned. The squad they sent in to investigate the train has been wiped out, and the train crashes into a weird facility that turns out to be another branch of Umbrella similar to the first game. Seems like it's owned by a Dr. Marcus, the old man that the leech monsters that Billy and Rebecca keep running into look like. Over the cameras, the game blows its load on the plot pretty early. The twink they keep seeing is actually a younger Dr. Marcus, revived by the T-virus infected leeches, who have for some reason given him back his youth and made him pretty powerful. And he has Birkin and Wesker pretty damn spooked because they helped Umbrella murder him. Exploring the mansion, we're just doing some good old survival horror shit. Solving puzzles, we're looking for a way out of here, requiring some key items. All of this to open a passage behind the painting of Dr. Marcus in the hallway. But, minus some typical old school Resident Evil annoyances, we're having a good time. This is probably the most fun you're gonna have with this game, so enjoy it while you can. Get a real good feel for how great Resident Evil 0 could have been, because once you open this painting and proceed through, it's all downhill from here, and it will be a very, very long time before it gets good again. Once Billy and Rebecca get separated here, Marcus unleashes these T-virus infected monkeys and Rebecca falls down a hole in the ground, and Billy has to go save her. While that's going down, Wesker and Birkin, feeling like Umbrella is finished if Marcus gets his reign of terror started, for reasons we'll get to later, form their plans for the plots that will become Resident Evil 1 and 2. Wesker has been working on his own tyrant for quite some time, so he'll lure his STARS teams into the mansion to acquire combat data on the virus and his personal creation. Birkin is going to set this place to blow, and then get to work on his G-virus that's supposed to be better than the T-virus. As soon as these fucking monkeys get released, this game turns to shit. Let's start with the monkeys themselves. These are hands down the worst enemies ever put in a Resident Evil game. Worse than the hunters, worse than the chimeras, worse than the dogs. Everything you've ever hated about the clunky controls, the horrible movement, the sluggish characters will all be amplified by fighting these things. They are faster than you, even if you try to run past them. Not like they even need it because they don't have to catch you. Their lunge attack has insane range. They have 0 cooldown on their attack, so they will stun lock you to death. They soak up insane levels of shots, even from a shotgun. And the game places a fucking cereal bowl full of them in any room anytime they show up. Not to mention how many times you will blow these things out of camera shot with no fucking idea whether or not they're back up because, of course, fixed camera angles. All of this shit while you're racing around this fucking maze trying to figure out where Rebecca is before she falls to her death, which is probably already frustrating you because she isn't where you think she would be based off of where you two were when she fell. She actually fell a floor below, which means if you come into this room and kill all these monkeys in here, already raging from how fucking awful of an experience that was, then you find out you never needed to come in here in the first fucking place, I wouldn't blame you for punching a fucking hole through your TV. Also, because of these shitty fixed camera angles, where Rebecca actually is in the underground dungeon can be hard to see, especially if you're trying to save ammo and get away from these goddamn monkeys while you look for her. This moment in the game is fucking terrible, pure garbage, and these things will pester you for the rest of the game, dragging down the game's quality. Alright, so let's talk about the Leechmen. These things are some of the strongest enemies in the game. They can soak up bullets and are weakest to fire. So any flame grenades or molotovs you can make in the game are best saved for dealing with them. The issue is, it's never made clear to you in the game, especially early on, that these guys are weak to fire. So you could fuck around and waste molotovs on zombies or other enemies, simply thinking it's just another new weapon to use, as you see fit in the game's sandbox. And like the Lickers in Resident Evil 2 and their blindness, I don't recall any sort of indication in the game that leechmen are weak to fire. Now, I may be wrong on that. There's probably some note late in the game I either missed or I'm not remembering, but regardless, the amount of leechmen spam from this point forward when it comes to this game starts to get out of control. Like, ridiculously out of control. And they fucking love to put them out of camera shot. I am so fucking glad I never have to deal with fixed camera angles again after we cover this game. Also, because this is an old school Resident Evil game, with that comes the same problem the older games have. Of being real asshole-ish and expecting you to know the future when it comes to a situation where there's a boss fight, or where Billy and Rebecca will be separated. So if Rebecca is holding your strongest shit when she gets grabbed by this boss, or Billy is when he gets separated from you, or you have the wrong character do something before you step in an encounter you could have known absolutely nothing about, fuck you, I guess. Billy at one point in the game is basically taking out of it completely until the ending area. There is no warning, there is no hint this is about to happen, nothing. Anything strong he has on him, you will lose until you find him again. Which is highly likely to happen because since he can take the most damage, you likely have your best shit on him since he's on point. This was a problem in Code Veronica when it came to switching back and forth between Claire and Chris without warning, but it's worse here by a country mile. In that game, anything you put in the item box could help the other character out, so even if you didn't know about the switch, maybe you have some first aid sprays or another weapon you didn't bring during the switch just sitting in the item box. But in this game, there is no fucking item box. Yeah, that's the biggest gripe with this game people have that I haven't really brought up yet. See, since the very first game, people have asked to just be able to drop items on the floor when they were out of space instead of being forced to use them to create space. These horrible fucking openings in Resident Evil 1 and Code Veronica before you find the item box could have been solved with this one simple feature. It is one of the biggest complaints of this era. So in this game, they decided to do it, but then took the item boxes out of the fucking game. Oh my god. Now, if we count the original games as their own thing, that means up to this point in the franchise, there are 6 Resident Evil games in total. By that I mean the mainline ones. This is the dumbest fucking decision I've ever seen made in a single one of them. Code Veronica made a lot of stupid game design decisions. Like the Magnum situation, the Steve chase, the airplane tyrant fight, the awful fucking final boss. But this takes the crown as the thing that killed classic Resident Evil off for good. You can drop items anywhere in the game, but when you need them again, you must come back to where you left them and transport them to wherever you need them like a 2-legged cargo train. This leads to you turning whatever room you think is a good spot into a makeshift item box that will store all your shit. Only, rooms have a limit on what you can place in them. So you might have to store your shit in another room in addition to your main one. So, what that means is whenever you enter a new area and you've made some progress and you think it might be a good time to bring all your shit along with you, you have to go back and forth for 2,000 fucking years picking up and dropping off shit in between locations. And if the way in between the two isn't clear because you decided to avoid some threats in your survival horror game, you are actually fucking punished by this system for doing so. Entering a new location? Is it somewhere where you should bring all your items or somewhere you won't be very long? On your first playthrough, who fucking knows? They removed the item box that was already tedious and created a worse system than the item box that is even more tedious. I can't fucking believe it. How do you even do that? Like, I feel sorry for people who started with Code Veronica as their first Resident Evil game because they got a bad impression of how good the previous games can be. Like, no bullshit, no funny shit. I really believe the people who started the series with Resident Evil 0 deserve free therapy. Making the item box situation even worse, the grenade launcher and the shotgun take up 2 slots now, by themselves, not including the ammo, so that's a whopping 3 slots gone, plus the handgun and its ammo filling 2 slots. Each character gets 6 slots, so that is 5 out of 6 slots taken up, depending on if you bring the grenade launcher or the shotgun. So your second character is where you'll be holding most of your health and key items. That's not including the hook shot. Oh my god, the fucking hook shot. If you know, you know, but this thing is a fucking train wreck. At certain points in the game, you will need to come fucking lug this piece of shit from wherever you left it to whatever hole in the ceiling you need to climb, which can be hard to see in certain scenarios anyway because of, again, the fucking fixed camera angles, just making it look like any other angle. But also annoying just because you straight up don't want to fucking backtrack for this thing. It's so fucking tedious, annoying, and boring. You will be in the zone, you know, that Resident Evil zone, and be completely taken out of it once you realize you need to go backpedal for this thing, after making hella progress. Oh yeah, I should also mention, from this point forward, you will only sparingly encounter zombies until you reach the final lab area. Almost every Resident Evil game tends to have. So, for the rest of the game, most of what you deal with will be leechmen, these fucking monkeys, and hunters who've returned again. So yeah, all the most annoying shit out of the rogues gallery until you get to the final area of the game where they bring back the zombies. So, be prepared for the rest of the game to fucking suck until then. Last thing I want to mention, the puzzles. You guys know the deal. I already hate puzzles in games, but in most of the other Resident Evil games, they were used reasonably. In this game, you cannot walk 3 fucking feet without having to deal with some puzzle. So, I'm already irritated by that because I came here for this. Not this. But on top of that, this game also does that stupid shit Resident Evil 3 did where the puzzle solutions are randomized from a table for some of them, so there's that. I'm just so fucking disappointed by this game once we hit this point in it. Because it starts off so good, it's such a cool idea for a Resident Evil game, and then they fuck it up completely. It's a slog to get through. I played this years ago and was so annoyed that even with a guide I found it tedious. But coming back to it for this video, I thought to myself, you know, maybe I was too hard on this game when I first played it. Let's give it another try with a clean slate. And no, it is still every bit as awful as I remember it being. I say again, it is just so fucking tedious. A huge chunk of your playtime is just running back and forth, depositing items into wherever you dump them and coming back for them, getting frustrated if you get hit by something that you were avoiding along the way. Because this just completely destroys that fight or flight decision making these old RE games are known for. And you're just flying on autopilot, zoned out while you run around. Like I'm not having fun. It's like reading a book where the first chapter is great, the last chapters are great, but the 6 fucking chapters in between them are all boring to read. Anyway, once we save Rebecca here, suddenly she has the hots for Billy and lies to her commanding officer about having found him. Doesn't matter that he's allegedly on death row for murdering 23 people, he's handsome, he's tatted up, and he's nice to her, so she thinks she can fix him. Easiest trick in a man's handbook. And he explains he's sentenced to execution because he was a soldier on a mission in Africa in a war, and the squad got bad intel on a target. His commanding officer ordered the entire village slaughtered, and he was the only one who didn't comply, and was so horrified by what they had done he went apeshit and killed his entire squad. So he killed people, but not 23 of them. The situation is complicated, and that's all Rebecca needed to hear. From here, we find our way out of Marcus's mansion into a boss fight. It's of course, and unsurprisingly, awful. Not even the auto-aim can help you here. These bats make targeting the boss a frustrating mess as you mash on the target change button. Trying to hit the flying fucking enemy moving around in a game with a fixed camera and tank controls giving you absolutely no sense of perspective or direction, and putting it down, we mess around in another lab area with a cable car we work to get up and running. Doing that triggers the point where Billy is separated from Rebecca for almost the rest of the game with no warning, so I hope you didn't have any good shit on him. You get one treat for your troubles. And that's a revisit to a couple of areas from Resident Evil 2 and all their beautiful remade and remastered glory. This is also the very last time Rebecca will speak to Enrico, as he'll run into her and never be seen again until his death in the first game. And what happens next is a boss fight with a proto-tyrant. This is your typical tyrant fight ruined by an oversight through the shit game design just preceding it. The second you use the key you need to start the fight, the area locks down. So if you dropped anything like I did, to pick up the key you need. In this case, being my shotgun ammo, you will never see it again because you can't come back here. I'll let your mind wander on all the possible useful shit you could drop in this one room and never see again. Needless to say, I reloaded my save. This is even worse because to account for this possibility, when the train crashed earlier in the game, the devs made sure to drop all your shit outside the train, knowing that you couldn't come back, but completely missed this like there was no possibility you might drop something to make room for this fucking key. But I'm already getting even more pissed off just talking about it, so let's just move on. Outside of that, it's about as annoying as a fight with one of these things usually is. Run to one side of the room, spam magnum shots until it knocks you down while you take 70 years to get back up, repeat until it's dead. Here, we're in the home stretch for the game now once we reach the lab. Next course of action, find Billy immediately. Doing that, we'll have one more fight with the Proto-Tyrant and really just kind of run around until we run into Marcus for the final boss. Marcus will explain that 10 years ago he ran the training facility we've been running around in, and Wesker and Birkin were his brightest students, his pride and joy. But they betrayed him for his rival, Spencer, the owner of the mansion from Resident Evil 1, and had him killed. The virus-infected leeches have revived him, and he transforms into a monster for our final fight. In horror tradition, he's actually weak to sunlight, so to kill him, that's what Billy and Rebecca use. With his death, they escape the facility just before Birkin's self-destruct sequence can torch the place, and Rebecca, being dick-hypnotized, lets a wanted felon escape into the wild. Good games, Billy. Textbook strategy. Played her like a damn fiddle. With that, Rebecca makes for the Spencer Mansion to kick off Resident Evil 1. New and exclusive to Resident Evil 0, almost as an apology for the game being so fucking shit, is Wesker mode, where Billy is replaced by Wesker, complete with powers, and Rebecca has the infamous mind control device placed on her from Resident Evil 5. Confirming what we already know, which is that Rebecca was the only woman that could warm this man's cold, dead heart, and he only settled for Jill and Jake's mom on the rebound. As far as the mode itself, it's pretty cool, it's interesting. The problem is that the mode is in Resident Evil 0, and I just cannot bring myself to play this game again, I'm sorry. I played this mode until the monkey showed up when the game goes downhill and then just went ahead and cashed out. I can't see myself ever revisiting Resident Evil 0 again. I tried it twice, I don't like it. It is the worst mainline Resident Evil game in this series, and I make no apologies in saying it. It had a cool idea that was overshadowed by some of the worst fucking game design in this franchise, and this, right after how bullshit Code Veronica was, put the final nail in classic Resident Evil's coffin. Even the fucking devs were bored of this shit. And halfway through Resident Evil 4's development, they scrapped everything and reinvented it into one of the best games ever made instead. I still remember the day I got my hands on the Origins collection. When it first released, I was so excited to bring it home and try it out, play through both of these games for the first time. I'd heard great things about Resident Evil 1's remake, but I made the horrible mistake of thinking since I already knew RE1's story, I'd start with Resident Evil 0, and it's probably the worst thing I could have done. It originally sucked all my motivation and patience out to even finish this shit that by the time I started Resident Evil 1, I was so fucking agitated and easy to set off, I never even completed it. Until years later, in a second attempt at a Let's Play of it on this channel, and I had a much better experience. Like I said at the start of this video, Resident Evil 1 will show you everything great about old school Resident Evil. Resident Evil 0 will show you everything fucking horrible about old school RE that buried it. And it will make you understand why Resident Evil 4 is the best thing that ever happened to this franchise. And just about the only reason Resident Evil is still alive today. These games themselves have done a lot to be modern, and I think if you can be a little patient with Resident Evil 1 Remake, its strengths and corrections to the original's fuck-ups make up for the outdated shit you have to put up with. That being said, I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that I revisit this game the same way I play Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake. Just by the nature of the kind of game it is versus the kind of game those are, I really don't touch this game as much. And a growing number of people feel that way about it. A lot of people think it needs another remake, even with attempts to make it easier on new players, and while yeah, I'd personally love that, I don't think it's necessary. If Resident Evil 1 got remade again to be over the shoulder, Jared from Avalanche Reviews might actually fucking cry. That's not a joke, I'm dead serious. He might actually cry real tears in heartbreak. Yeah, over the shoulder Resident Evil won the war, and we're never going back to this shit ever again, and rightfully so. Good riddance. But as much as I love sitting on my throne with my numerous action RE games and my over-the-shoulder camera, you gotta leave people like him something still in the pipeline. Let Resident Evil 1's relevant version stay pure and fixed camera angled, so that there is still one relic left of what this franchise used to be. And its best example of it. The over-the-shoulder fans like me have enough games already. This franchise is ours now. Hell, they fucking added the mode to Resident Evil 8 for us, and Resident Evil 9 will probably be back to it as well. Let them keep something. Alright, so that's all the classic Resident Evil games I need to talk about in combination with my last video. And I really should just move on to Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, where things get a lot better, but there's one more era I want to take a look at that still has lore relevance, and that's the Chronicle Light Gun games. Parts of these are still canon, and while it's no replacement for playing a proper Resident Evil game, if you just can't be fucked to do that and want to skip straight to 4, these do offer an interesting and player-engaged way to get a little story recap, with some exclusive stories that help supplement the later games. Believe it or not, these games are actually really important to Resident Evil's overall narrative. We'll talk about it though, I'll see you next time.